All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Healthy Indoors live show. I'm your host, Bob Krell. I'm founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors magazine, and we are really happy that you are joining us today, wherever you're joining us from. Many of you are probably on the Healthy Indoors online community. You may be watching us either live streamed or recorded after, and we do have this recording and all our recordings available there, as well as audio podcasts of these shows. So we highly recommend you check that out. But we're also coming to you live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and several other places. So lots of great stuff. Would like to just remind you on the Healthy Indoors online community is something you should check out. He is the president of Home Cleanse. It's just newly rebranded. He was with a company. The company was originally called All American Restoration. Michael and his company specialize in working with people who are immunocompromised or have acute or sustained reactions to mold exposure. He's also the author of the book, The Mold Medic, and he's been featured on numerous programs, including Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop podcast. So I guess without further ado, we'll welcome Michael. Hey, how are you?
Hey, Bob, thanks for having me here.
So exciting to have you here. You're somebody that I haven't met before in person. We just had a little pre-show intro, but I had an opportunity to see you popping up all over the place. So you're definitely you're out there and visible.
Well, thank you for that. And it's interesting. 2019, I believe it was I was at the Indoor Air Quality Association. I was a guest speaker with a buddy of mine by the name of Brian Carr, and you actually did a keynote speech at that event. And one of the things that really stuck with me from that event, that things that you said is, we need to evolve the air quality industry forward, and it's something that really stuck with me then. So thank you for that.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Somebody remembers it. That was right before. Actually, I think it was 2020. It was right at the onset of COVID, and because then we
Literally,
stopped
yeah.
having live events. Not long after that, which was challenging. So, you've your company's changed the name. And obviously there's a reason behind going with a new moniker with Home Cleanse. And tell us a little bit about that and what is a Home Cleanse.
So what's interesting about our company before was called All American Restoration, and there was two main reasons behind the rebrand. Number one is we plan to go global, either next quarter or the first quarter of next year, and All American Restoration may not do as well overseas. Considering the name, obviously. And the other thing was, we're trying to really advance what we're doing for the industry. And I think that All American Restoration sounds so much like everything else out there. And we really wanted to kind of be different and try to start a different conversation around home and home health.
Makes total sense. And again, you've been involved with it's more than just remediation. Obviously, your company is doing remediation, and obviously it's specialty remediation, higher. I'm assuming a higher quality of detail, and again, you're dealing with more susceptible patients that maybe have more acute issues. But you're also doing product lines too, right? There's some.
Yeah, so we have products coming out. We have what's called the dust test, and we have another thing called My Mold Report. My Mold Report's live now. It's an inexpensive way for people to analyze lab data or analyze mold reports that they've gotten from an inspector to try to get an unbiased answer as to what they should do and how they should take next steps to remediate. The dust test is something that we're utilizing existing technology, partnering with labs to just make those types of tests more accessible. And I'm sure you'll ask me about some of that stuff later, so I'll save it for then. But pretty excited about that for people to have this at-home way of doing things themselves.
Well, I mean, and that at face value makes a lot of sense to me, having been in the industry for a bit. And consumers, even commercial clients, but consumers especially, you hand, a consultant hands them a report, from a laboratory on whatever analyses were done, spore traps or, the whole battery of stuff. And that's it. How do they interpret that? So that's difficult.
Well, too,
Um,
think about it like this. Most inspectors, they're a one-man show, or one woman show, and they don't have infrastructure, for them to do consults all day and go out and investigate homes for many hours, take whatever samples they feel is adequate for that home. It's a lot of time. Then you have to spend time writing the report. So it's very difficult, right? To spend the time that customers really need to understand what's going on inside their home or their workplace. So, we hope to help assist with that.
it makes sense. It makes total sense. So the home cleanse, that term to me denotes that you're doing more than just a mold remediation, right?
Yeah.
So delve into that a little bit. I'd like to hear a little more about it.
Yeah. So, when we talk about mold or bacteria, which are pretty much the top two things that infiltrate homes when they're water damaged, we have two looking at basic microbiology here. We have the organism and the particle, and then you add the toxin into the mix to further add confusion, right? But you have just that basis of organisms and particles. The mold remediation industry, as it's standalone, it does a pretty good job with identifying sources of mold, removing those sources of mold. I don't know if it focuses much on bacteria, which I think it probably needs to a little more, but it doesn't do a great job at what do we do with all the particles and what do we do with the toxins that have been created. And I think that's where I have kind of been working on over the past 10 years, really trying to dive into, cleaning the home, how much cleaning is needed, what's the right order to clean the home. And it's been, literally 10 years of trial and error figuring that out and creating some sort of process that we could standardize and say, if the home is remediated and then the home is clean in this fashion, we know that the home is going to be as clean as possible, and that person's going to be a lot more likely to be able to live back in that home. And primarily dealing with people that are extremely sensitive to their environment, we had to figure out how to go above and beyond.
Well, I think you're hitting on a key point too, that it's more than just mold often in these, when you're dealing with microbial issues. And I think that's something that in the industry has been sadly lacking. We became very mold centric, um, instead of just microbiological centric.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that was driven by the fact, the advent of the Spore Trap cassette, came out in the mid to late 90s, and it made it a lot easier to take that, that type of sample. Anybody could pretty much capture one of those, and it got everybody away from culturable air samples. So you stop looking at a lot of things. Culture samples are still done, but Spore Trap became, I think, the preeminent sampling methodology, for better or worse, because there were some
Yeah.
advantages, but certainly there's some gaping, holes in any analyses done that way. And yeah, the environment, right? If it's a wet environment, if there's a moisture issue, the likelihood that there's more than just mold and potentially a bacterial issue, pretty good, pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So again, you're going in and looking at multiple constituents that could be causing a problem in a space. So that's
Totally.
interesting.
And
Is
what's interesting to me too is about this is, when I walk into homes, a lot of the homes that I go into, they're immaculate, they're pristine. You would
mhm,
never think there was a problem. And so that's why it's so important to really look at the different modalities of testing and try to go above and beyond to figure out what the heck is it, right?
mhm,
It's in HVAC systems. I see a lot of HVAC systems not being tested in
mhm.
inspections. It's hidden behind walls, right? And so you have to utilize different tools and techniques to try to figure out where could the water be coming from, even when there's no obvious signs of water
Mhm.
damage. So I think it's a little tricky, right? But
Oh, it's way
we've
tricky.
yeah, it's way tricky. But we've done a great job kind of working with people and trying to figure out, utilizing different science. And this is why I want to talk more about the dust test later, because kind of I like to start there and actually work backwards, looking for abnormalities of what's going on inside their dust, can then help us dictate, if there's, let's say, high levels of aspergillus that are 100 times higher than the average home. We're able to then try to figure out, okay, where can this aspergillus be coming from? That's just one small example, but I figure working that way and start working backwards is pretty helpful for a consultant to go in and try to, do a wide range of tests to figure out what's going on.
Well, let's run with that right now, because I think that's a great segue to get into it. So you've had a lot of promotion about using the ERMI
Sure.
methodology for sampling, and has in the industry, many people don't agree with that, that methodology and that analysis, protocol, at least the whole setup of that. So tell me about. your dust testing protocol, and I'm assuming we're going to be going down the ERMI thing.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously it's a hot topic in my book. There's a chapter called The Elephants in the Room. And, we talk about ERMI. I can't for the life of me figure out exactly why people don't want to use it, at all. But because I think it's very valuable. You have 36 different species utilizing MSQ PCR technology. You're able to quantify in each different type of mold how much is there per milligram of dust. And obviously, the EPA did a study with this, right? And the data they've collected over 1,000 different homes, I believe it was. And so that kind of gives you what's considered an average thing. You're going to have mold, right? We're not building bubbles around people's homes. But when you start to see things that are 100 times, 1,000 times higher than the average, you can pretty much bet that there's going to be a source somewhere in that home producing those particles that you're testing for. So I think the biggest problem with ERMI is on the post-test side, which I can totally understand and agree with, especially if you're just there opening up a bedroom wall and remediating a bedroom and you're expected to pass an ERMI of the entire house. It's not really fair, right? So
Hmm.
I think that there definitely needs to be a good way to utilize that technology for post testing. But for pre-testing, I think it's a great idea, and we're actually building a whole platform off of that idea.
Okay.
And I think the reason being is because again, we can look for abnormalities, and then an inspector can go in and help try to find where those sources are coming from. Um,
So your premise though is that you're going to go in and use that as a pre-screening tool,
yeah,
because I think one of the points that have been made by a lot of people is that when you take a homogeneous sample, right, or that's the attempt, it's a conglomerate of areas, multiple dust samples kind of glommed together into an ERMI analyses. You don't really know where the source is of any what you pick up there.
sure.
So
No, but I think it's a good entryway for people
okay.
to say, "Do I have an issue?" Right? And then they can hire an inspector to then go and figure out where those sources are with other means of testing. It's not the end all and be all. It's
Mhm.
definitely a tool in the tool belt. And I think it's a great entryway because so many people are like, "Is it mold? Is it, could my house have mold? Is this, impacting my health?" They want answers.
Mhm.
And for right now, they're not getting many answers because the gold standard today is you just come in and take an air sample off that air cassette. And guess where people take it? In the center of the room. It's like
Okay.
every single time, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
And you take it in the center of the room, and guess where all the problems are? On the exterior walls, on the
Mhm.
walls that have plumbing in them, further away from the center of the room. So you're less likely to pick stuff up that could be a problem. Obviously the air changes from second to second, minute to minute, hour
Mhm.
to hour. You're not picking everything up. And why I like the dust is because whatever is aerosolizing in your home is going to settle in that dust.
Mhm.
And guess what happens? That dust recirculates, it re-aerosolizes, enters your breathing zone, and gets into the body. So I think it's a better way to screen, from that initial first step of, is there something going on in my home?
I mean, I would definitely agree, and I think most people would agree that dust represents a good historic, record of what's happened in the space. And I think that's good. I think the big complaints, or at least the questions, is the actual ERMI chart, the scale, because
Oh yeah,
there's a lot. I mean, the qPCR analysis, doing the DNA based analysis. I think everybody is has agreed that's pretty good analysis, pretty accurate. You have a limited number of organisms that you profile with it, but pretty much concrete proof that you found the organism in the space. But the scales, it's like, and there's been other people in the industry that created their own ERMI like scales. We even go, whose that is, but
sure.
these kind of things, like, I think tend to make it questionable, because is that truly representative, you know based on the scale, the number,
Oh yeah.
I'm
No,
just like.
so when I was working with this, doctors were telling patients, you have to have below a 2 on the ERMI in order to live in this home. And it's like, it was funny to me because as a remediator, you have no control over what that score is going to say because the score is basically just group 1 minus group 2. And if you have outside influence and you have more molds that are coming in group 2 than in group 1, you're going to have a better chance of success. The building's tighter, you don't really have much outside influence. You're getting rid of all molds from all columns as you're cleaning the home. You're not going to have exactly a proper sliding scale. So
Right, right.
you're never going to get below this 2, and you're going to be in this job forever. which I think has been one of the biggest problems. I don't look at the score at all. I don't believe in it. I don't trust it. I don't think that it provides any value. I
Okay.
do look though at the data, like how many spores are per milligram of dust, spores,
Mhm.
fragments, etc. And depending on the lab you use, a lot of them will provide asterisks, which is helpful for the customer to kind of give you an understanding of, is this 10 times higher than normal,
Mhm.
100 times, or 1,000 times. And I think that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking for abnormalities, and I'm educating people that you're
Mhm.
not building a bubble around your house. It's never going to be mold free. But what you do want is you want to be within normal range. You want to have a normal home. You don't want to have something growing that's producing so many particles that it's abnormal, because that's more
Mhm.
particles opportunistically getting in contact with the body. We all know that from the medical standpoint, we're learning more and more every day about how this can impact our health. So what we do know is optimum air quality is optimal for our health.
It makes sense. So yeah, and that's the thing. I guess the exception that most people would take is with the actual ERMI scale, and not so professionals in the industry, not so much qPCR analysis of resident dust. Yeah, I think that's a really valid thing to look at, and yeah. So I can concur with that. My concern is though is that ERMI term is still used all the time. I mean, you're using it, and a lot of people, a lot of people in the industry are using it, both pro and con. And from a consumer standpoint, they could easily be driven into making that whole category one minus category two determination, using that ERMI scale, and that I just don't think that holds water in many cases.
Yeah, you're right, because the ERMI actually is the index itself, right? And that's
Yeah,
what
yeah,
that's
because
what
the ERMI
that's
is
what
not
it's
the
referencing.
analysis. I mean, it's
Right,
qPCR analysis of dust,
right.
which is, and I think it might be better. I think to the general consumers, for us to get away from that ERMI term, because the ERMI term pulls you right down that path of using that sliding scale. You know.
No, you're right. And obviously with the dust test, we're focusing more on the data, not on the
Right.
scale. It's not something that we really find valuable at all.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You're using, you're using the data, which makes, that makes total sense. So I'm assuming that's your pre-screening. So
Yeah.
and who collects that pre-screen? You rely
The
on
customer
consumers to
will.
collect it?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
so basically, when you order this kit from us, how it's going to work, you're going to get a QR code. That QR code's going to ask you for information to fill out the chain of custody, essentially. You're going to have a video of how to collect the sample properly. You'll watch that video. It'll be very quick, maybe 60 seconds long, explaining where to collect, where not to collect, how to collect. You'll get gloves with it. You'll have a pre sealed envelope with the sampling kit. You'll put it back into the envelope. You'll print out the chain of custody, put it back in that box. It goes off on its way back to the lab. So that's that. It's we're trying to make it super simple. It's not perfect, because anything consumer based never is perfect. But I think it's going to give people more access to data without kind of running into this rabbit hole of, is my house affecting me? Is it not affecting me? Is it perfect? Is it not perfect? Who do I call? Who do I trust? And what I hope it does, Bob, is I hope it revolutionizes the way that we do screen homes, and stop just coming in and taking one air sample in the center of a house and telling people the house is fine, because I think that's really where we kind of go down this wrong path.
yeah, I totally concur with that. I mean, from an air sampling standpoint, again, taking either type of or any type of air sample. Sport trap is what's predominantly done. I mean, it's a
Right.
5 minute excursion. It's a couple of cubic feet of air for
Right.
5 minutes that catches a very small collection point and capture efficiency. And yeah, and you're trying to extrapolate to 24/7, 365 days a year from one little 2 cubic foot of air out of a space. No, and there's a lot of subjectivity in the analyses on that as well.
Totally.
So,
And
so, so that raises the point.
I see about 100 to 200 inspection reports a month, just to give you kind of a frame of reference. And I would say 50% of these labs that we see are just exactly that. It's two air samples in the center of the room, and the person's like, I think I have mold, and you look at the air sample and you're like, I don't see anything here, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
here to tell me that there is or is not a problem. It's just inconclusive, right? So, that's what really prompted me to say, we have to do something about this. We have to give people more information, because the consumers drive the demand. And then obviously, from a business standpoint, the businesses then fill that demand. And so as long as people can go in homes and take an air sample or two and call it a day, they're going to keep getting away with that. So we have to kind of educate everybody all one shot.
Yeah, and clearly, that is one of the big problems in this industry. I totally agree with you on that because it became so easy to capture spore traps. They're fairly inexpensive to have analyzed. They're pretty easy to handle. It's fast. Fast turnaround time because you don't have to culture anything. Prior to that, in the mid to early '90s and before that, it was the single stage impactor, right? The Anderson sampler, the N6. That's what everybody used, and you had to wait anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to subculture and get all that data. And that just doesn't work for remediation. You can't wait 2 weeks to clear a
Right.
job. So that's how the spore trap got in, and I think the spore traps is it offers a lot of good information. But so what other
Sure.
types of analyses and methodologies do you typically do and you find valuable as far as going out? Let's say a consumer takes a qPCR analysis, or sample comes back, and you find suspect levels of target organisms. What's next? Where do you go?
Yeah, so typically from there, we're, once we have a screen and we see that there's some abnormalities there, we're, consulting with the client on bringing that to an inspector that they like, someone in their area that can help them, and give them that data. And first off, they're asking, do you see abnormalities? They're trying to get a sense of how they're going to help find it too. Again, trying to avoid them just coming back into the room and saying, taking an air sample and saying, I didn't find anything, so must not really be here, and then citing on the EPA that the ERMI is a research tool, right, and that it shouldn't be used. So this is kind of the tailspin that people go in sometimes, and we're trying to really educate not only the consumer, but obviously by putting myself out there, I'm hoping that other industry people see this as well and try to understand exactly what I'm trying to do here. And it's really just doing a better job investigating, right? We have to stop relying on the air cassette. It's a tool. I like it. I just don't like it if we take one air sample in the center of a room and say there's no problem there. I just don't think that's valuable. There's some great ways to use the air cassette. I think taking an air sample closer to where you suspect there may be mold would be helpful. You can obviously poke a hole through a wall. There's those tubes that stick to the cassette that you can pull an air cavity sample. Of course, you got to be careful of the debris, but that is a useful way. I don't know if you've heard of Instascope. I love
Absolutely, yeah.
Instascope.
Yep.
I met with the CEO. I mean, I love what he's trying to do, getting real time data, looking at particles, how it changes. I love
hmm
how you can take that wand and spin it around the whole house and look
Right.
at
I mean,
differences.
that's truly a dynamic process where you're not
Yeah,
collecting, a sample in one spot and trying to make a generalization. They're moving around, getting different stratification levels, and
yeah.
it's very fascinating what they're
Yeah, no,
doing.
it is. I
Yeah.
mean, I love the ability to swab or tape lift, water stains. I've seen water stains that looked like no big deal. And, a consultant that swabbed or tape lifted it. And it was mind blowing, actually, what was
hmm
there, right? Like it looked like nothing. You would have never thought. So I think, paying more attention and actually testing and verifying, I think is helpful. Unless, of course, the person's willing to just open up every single thing in their home, right? But kind of going back to this, we working with people with limited budgets. We have to prioritize utilizing data. What's the best bang for the buck here?
hmm
It's certainly most people are not going to have the funds to open up every little water damage spot in their home. And I think that's where testing comes into play. Let's see which areas are worse than the others so we can prioritize what you actually need to do, to try to create a healthier environment. And I think that's kind of the whole premise of how our company works. We're very data driven.
Well, I mean, again, that makes a lot of sense, and I think one of the big dilemmas for consumers, right, is that they can't make informed choices because they don't know. You go online and there's so much conflicting information out there, especially from a consumer standpoint. I mean,
Oh
even
yeah.
as a professional in the industry, it's hard to weed through some of this stuff. If you're not a highly experienced professional, you can fall prey to some of this stuff as well. Um, but I would totally concur with the whole data mindset. It's like data is great. As a consultant, I've had consumers, call us up and say, we've done this ERMI test, and my first thing is, okay, I don't care about the ERMI scale, but let's see the results. I want to
Yeah.
see the data from, I want to see the lab analysis of that qPCR because that's valuable.
Yeah.
The number that was assigned, it's like, nah, I don't really care about
Yeah.
that. But yeah, definitely. I think your approach sounds reasonable. The big thing is, you know, and I think you touched on this, is that consumers have limited budgets and they don't have a lot of money to pay a consultant a ton of money to come in and do front end work. Yeah, in a perfect world, you do destructive exams of everything, right? The
Yeah.
only way you're not going to miss something is literally to open everything up,
Right.
right? But that's not reasonable unless it's a total loss type situation. So you're not going to do that typically. So, you have to use limited invasive technologies, right? Small holes
Totally.
here and there, and right,
Small
so that
holes
makes
here and
sense.
there. You have thermal imaging cameras. I ask a lot of inspectors, did you walk around the outside of the property? They say no. Why not? Looking at the outside of the property where water
Right.
is most likely to intrude, right? Where that'll give you some tips and tricks to figuring out where to test. And I think that, again, I just think that our industry, unfortunately, has gotten a little lazy, and a little complacent. And I think that, that's kind of part of the problem. And um, new ideas, is always met with uh, friction, right? But I
Right.
think that
Yeah.
it's what we need. We need to revamp, as you said back in 2019. We need to evolve a bit, and hopefully that people are listening to it can kind of see the reasonableness of what we're trying to evolve it.
Well, I think and the friction's good. I mean, I just based on my historic, time here, I've been doing this since like the mid '80s, which is just horrifying to even consider. And the number of things that I've seen that are really, new technologies with quotation marks, and the wonder prescriptive, the thing of du jour. A lot of times they just end up not being that good, or
Sure,
sometimes just flat out misrepresented. So I view everything with some skepticism, because
sure,
and I think it's a matter of being jaded, having seen a lot of things.
yeah,
And I think that's the test of time for any new ideas anyway. They're going to get met with skepticism. You come up with a groundbreaking methodology or technology or just a way of doing things, and you're going to get friction, because obviously the sacred cows don't want to be disturbed. And there's ways things are being done and people aren't really, the forces that be don't necessarily want change. So in that, you're going to have pushback. But
sure.
again, I think what happens is, if you do have something that is credible and credible idea, it's going to move forward. It's going to meet resistance, but you got to persevere through that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of unknowns. I think as other people start to figure out, how to incorporate this into their business, and how to just think differently, think outside of the box a little more, utilize some of the different technologies, figure out how to utilize those technologies. It'll become a lot easier. There'll be a lot less friction. If you've been doing inspections for many years, just taking an air sample in the center of a room, and you have a guy who's 33 that comes in and says, stop doing that. That's not good. Yeah, it's going to rub you the wrong way, right? But as you start to see that, as you start to see how maybe you can be more helpful and there's other things that you can do and you learn those things, you'll also obviously start to shift. So it's interesting. I think this industry, obviously it's been around many years, but
Mhm.
I still look at it as its infancy. I think
Oh,
we
it
are
hasn't evolved
still
yet. I mean,
we are still, we're still learning new things every day. We're still trying to figure out, I personally got involved after Hurricane Sandy. And basically, I started seeing a pattern of people complaining of illness, homes that were supposedly remediated, and then you're looking at the inspection report, and you're like, "How is this remediated? This looks like it
right.
was, from a lab data perspective, this looks like this thing just started growing." So it's interesting. As I started to dive into that, and I started to notice kind of the patterns of organism, particle, we're missing the boat here. I wanted to do everything that I could to help people that needed help, and we've done a great job so far. We've helped over 1,000 families fix their homes. Some of them that have thought they were never going to be able to live in that home again. There's a story of a woman, Shannon Hill in Florida, literally had a GJ feeding tube in her because she couldn't eat. Within 7 days of moving back, with 7 days of moving out of her home, she was able to remove the feeding tube. She was bedridden 95% of the time. She went back to being standing and walking 95% of the time. So these are some of the miracles that we've seen, which makes it all hard to ignore how important that it is that we evolve and how we start to look at this from a health
Mhm.
perspective. instead of just this, insurance job. And I think
Right,
if we
right.
can start to
Yeah.
do that, we will help a lot of people in the process.
I mean, one of the big problems I think all of us face in the industry, both on the consulting or remediation side, is that we don't really have, you know, a direct correlation of environmental parameters like spores per cubic meter, whatever test we did, and how that directly affects a health outcome in an individual. We just don't, and I'm not sure we'll ever have that conclusively.
Sure.
But it makes it challenging, because are spores per cubic meter even something that we need to consider? I don't know. I mean, I've asked that question since I've been taking spores per cubic meter samples. It's like, I was like, is this even the right thing we're looking at? Because I know when you get into a litigation situation, you're testifying as an expert witness in this industry. The big thing is, if there's got to be a medical practitioner that makes that cross diagnosis versus environmental, and that's hard. That's really hard to prove in a legal case, which begs the question of, like, we need that information. It'd be nice to know a little bit more. Um,
I totally agree with
uh,
you. And here's what I hope the dust test will do, because we've already partnered with a few doctors who are going to have this in their office, and they're going to get data, right? So for how long have doctors, they may get medical data, maybe they do mycotoxin urine analysis or whatnot. Maybe they're looking at organic acid tests, they're looking for different biomarkers that might make them more susceptible to their environment, but they don't have the data of the home. And it's for some reason, it's like we don't talk to one another, right? We don't have the investigation community talking to the medical community.
mhm.
Typically, I mean, you may have a couple different scientists that do, right? But from a large standpoint, investigators and consultants, they go in a lot more homes than a scientist will.
Sure.
Yet and there's how much data collected,
Or
right?
a medical doctor. I mean, medical doctors make diagnoses from afar that could be environmental, driven.
Right.
It could be environmental factors there, and how, a clinician can't do that from afar. There has to be more cross pollination as far as this information, right?
It's interesting. Like, you can go to the World Health Organization, you can go to the EPA's website, you can go to the American Lung Association's website. You will find all these different pieces of information to suggest that air quality is a big proponent to optimizing health, right? And that if you have poor air quality, you're likely to have poor health. But for some reason, they're all said in different ways, and none of it's ever stringed together to say, if you're living in a water damaged home, you may experience a wide range of symptoms. FEMA tells us, EPA tells us, if you have mold, remove it, right? Just remove it. They wouldn't tell you to remove it if they didn't think that it was a problem. So
Right,
we
but
know,
yeah, but they're not prescriptive enough. Unfortunately, the
right?
guidance that you get from these organizations doesn't really help a consumer in the end, right? Necessarily.
Totally. You got
Yeah.
100 and I think it's 157 different PubMed articles on the NIH about, different studies with mold and mycotoxins and bacteria and water damage homes. But again, they're not, like you said, how will we ever get that? Well, somebody would have to agree to a human study, right? And who's going to agree to subject themselves to humans? It just won't happen, right? So what do? We study on animals. We study on rats. But yet we don't want to use those rat studies, even though we use them for everything else out in the world. We don't want to use those studies for this. So, it's obviously a very slippery slope, and it's a reason why I started Change the Air Foundation, hoping to be able to continue to grow this and be able to help support more research studies. Hoping that the dust test will have enough data over time, sharing with the doctors that have the dust test available for them and their patients, and being able to kind of connect the scientific and medical community a little bit more with some more data. I think that's really what we need. In order to evolve this industry, we need conclusive data.
So let's touch on that a little bit more, on your Change the Air Foundation. I know that's a new organization. You're one of the founders of that, co-founders.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
So, there's a lot of different foundations that are geared towards air quality. A lot of them outdoor air quality. There are some different ones on mold that maybe offer financial assistance for families that are struggling. Maybe they had to throw out their kids' toys or something, or lost it in a big water loss, and can't replace it. Right. So there's certain functions that already exist out there. Our organization is actually driven towards policy change. It's driven towards research. There will be some financial assistance, but we're going after more like government grants. We would love to work with, HUD and help clean up some, Section 8 buildings where people live and are on disability and probably don't have the best air quality, if we're being honest. So trying
Sure.
to change things from that perspective. But I think policy change is something that, for me, I'm most passionate about at this point, just because, in 50 states of America here, not one of them considers mold a health hazard. Obviously
A
we,
few
we have
regulated, but it's
free or
it's
regulated,
it's
but
it's knee-jerk reaction regulation.
right. Again, it's
Yeah.
it's it's loosely regulated. It's still the Wild Wild West, but what are we regulating if it's not a health hazard? We have to just call a spade at some point and say it's a health hazard. We don't want too much of it in our environments. Again, we're not trying to, this isn't like you can't have any mold, right? But if you have a lot of it in your environment, odds
Mhm.
are it's probably not a good idea. So we have
Right.
to go out and say these things. And I think that that's one of the initiatives is let's get this passed as a whole health hazard in all 50 states. We need a little tighter real estate disclosure laws, not necessarily on mold specifically, because I think that would be too specific. I think we need to be more broad about water damage. Like if you have water damage, you should disclose it. I think that's important because water damage can bring mold and bacteria and a host of other things that can hurt people. There are too many stories that I have of people buying their first home. Especially in this type of market where you're spending probably every penny you have to buy a place right now. You don't have extra resources to go in and
Right.
rehab. And
Right.
so when people just out now don't disclose things, it's really not fair, right? And you're putting someone else in harm's way. So I think
Mhm.
we need a little bit of tighter regulations. There are some states that do have them, but there's also a lot that don't. Um, and obviously, there's a wide reaching range of what needs to be done from a policy perspective. And I don't want to strike too many fires here, but we all know that essentially we can certainly modernize the way in which we look at water damaged buildings and homes. And I think we all care about our health. We all care about our kids' health and our grandkids' health. We want to leave in our place a better world than we left it. And I think that we can, as a community, come together and figure that out. And there's no perfect law. I'm not suggesting there ever
Right.
will
Right.
be,
It's
but
hard
I
to
think
this is hard to regulate because there are a
it,
lot of
yeah,
there's a lot of moving parts to this
yeah.
topic.
But I definitely think that we can do better than we currently are. It's
Mhm.
2022,
Yeah.
and we have to do better than we have been.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting too, an interesting sidebar, I think, is the insurance industry has a database on water damage and properties that they share jointly amongst companies, right? They have
Mhm.
a full database on that. So it's not like, and if you think about it, they're in the business of assigning risk. So why would they be concerned about assigning risk to water damage if they didn't truly perceive it as a risk as an insurer
Right.
on the space, right? So
Totally.
yeah, it'd be nice if the consumers could have access to similar data.
Yeah.
I would concur with that. So, along those lines with the foundation, what current IAQ researchers would you like to see your foundation work with? Do you have any? I'm just curious.
Honestly, there are so many great people that have come, that have been in the past. Obviously, you being one of them, being in this industry for 36 years, I've always been inspired by you speaking at any event I've been a part of, specifically for the Indoor Air Quality Association. But no, I'm looking to connect with anyone and everyone who has a like-minded vision of creating a better future, having better rules and regulations, having more accountability around water damaged buildings and the effects they can create, that wants to see this information come out. I believe me, we've seen some proponents of these bills where the Board of Education was against one of our bills in one of the states. Roofers Association was against one of the bills. Insurance companies are going to be against it. I know
Sure.
we have it's and
You're up against deep
everyone's not going to
pockets.
be coming in hand, all excited about this.
Right.
But we have to remember that from that perspective, like change is good. We'll figure out a way to make change. And everyone who's part of the other side that feels like they may be more adversely affected by this change, you'll adapt. You'll adapt, you'll
Hmm.
adjust, you'll figure out a way to make new money. And guess what? People will be better for it. So it's a win-win because the
Yeah,
more
as long as
people
it's
we have that are
positive.
healthy, right, the better
Right.
the economy is. I think it's a very positive thing that we can do.
Yeah, well, and it's also, it's not unreasonable to expect, again, the old sacred cows to have to adapt to, new science, new revelations. I mean, I don't know if they're that new, but but once you can finally, you know, document things and prove things to a higher degree, um, i- they're going to have to adapt to that, or they're going to fall by the wayside. If you want to keep doing it the way you used to do it, we're not still using, manufacturing buggy whips, and we're not still, there's a lot of things
Right.
we're not still doing. The yellow
Right.
pages. I wouldn't want to be selling yellow page ads for, there's a lot of things that have, now there's going to be somebody selling yellow page ads that's going to really be upset about that. But the reality is, right, that was the way you had to do business 15, 20 years ago, and
Sure.
things evolve, and you have to follow that. So what organizations are you working as far as industry organizations, like, eh, you've mentioned IAQA a few times, but are there other industry organizations that you are looking to partner with or you work with, but both on behalf of your not for profit, and also what you do, just what you're doing with your business with Home Plans? Just
Yeah,
curious.
well, the IICRC, we just got approval from them to share one of their graphics that we absolutely love that highlights, the which states even have mold regulations and which don't, which is most of the U.S. So we definitely, I mean, I personally love the IICRC. Our firm is certified by IICRC. They have the guidelines that they've created. There's really not one scenario where I don't think those guidelines are applicable. And matter of fact, I think the problem with the industry is not knowing those guidelines well enough. I'll just give you one quick example to tie this together. IICRC S500, right? It talks about how mold remediation or any sort of microbial remediation, including bacteria, would happen before drying, water mitigation. You want to know what the hole in that is, though? It typically takes 3 to 5 days to dry out a building, right? The
Or
industry
more.
standard,
Yeah,
or
or
more.
more. Yeah,
Mold grows in as quickly as 24 to 48 hours
or less. you know
or less.
12, in the right
So
conditions.
so essentially every water mitigation job is turns into a mold remediation job as the job is
Potentially.
ongoing,
Potentially.
potentially.
Yep, I would agree.
And unfortunately, that's something most water mitigation companies don't even know that they're supposed to do remediation beforehand. And they come in even 3 or 4 days after it happened, just start cutting walls, put in 145 fans all over the place,
Right, right, and blowing
right?
everything
They're
everywhere.
just billing the insurance company for every little fan they put in there, and they just blow it all around. I mean, this is a big problem that we experience, and it's a lack of, right? You're supposed to get a hygienist to come in and evaluate that before you start mitigation, unless it has been fairly quickly. So
Mhm.
there's just a lack of understanding in what the standards are that are set by the IICRC. I think they're amazing. They talk a lot about porous items, non-porous items, categories of losses, how to clean, how to clean, the importance of cleaning. I think that I pretty much would say that I everything that my business is built around those IICRC
Mhm.
protocols. And then I've added different techniques to it, right, to further advance things, just in terms of how we clean the home and which order do we clean the home in. And, I mean, we go nuts. We HEPA vacuum 3 different directions. We wipe down in 3 different directions. We go above and beyond, very thorough, because we want to be able to say that we did everything we could to get it
Mhm.
done in a timely manner, right? So that we're not having to keep coming back and keep delaying things. So I think, that's definitely an organization that we want to continue to support, and want to continue to collaborate with. Hopefully, I would imagine that they would also want to see the same type of vision that we have going. The Indoor Air Quality Association, of course, I've been a member for as long as I can remember. I don't remember the exact date, but at least 2014, 15. Which is earlier on in my career at that point. And I was a sponsor for every single chapter out in New Jersey when I was in New Jersey. Just everyone I've met at the Indoor Air Quality Association has been great. Of course, it's an industry. Affair, so not everybody sees eye to eye. But I would say that there's just been a lot of great relationships that have come out of that. And there's obviously many organizations, but I would say those are my top two favorite ones. And would love to expand my network out of that.
Mhm. And to IICRC, the S520 mold remediation standard. There's a new incarnation of that in the wings that we've been
Yes.
hearing is going to be out fairly soon. Maybe before the end of the year. That's what I've been hearing from numerous people.
Yeah, I read the
Um,
public version of that. Like I said, I think they're a really good
mhm.
organization. Love how they keep advancing things.
Yeah, and then certainly, I think, to your point that there's a lot of people in the industry that may not be in tune with doing these things. Is it by design or is it by ignorance? And I'm not asking you to answer that question. I mean, my concern is that, I've seen this all along the industry since the beginning. There's always seemed to have been factions of the remediation and consulting side that maybe willfully don't follow. They're trying to do things their way. So let me do a shift here. You do a thing called Mold Talks. It's video podcast. So what kind of things, what's your number one thing you've learned from speaking to consumers on that?
Well, again, after dealing with 1,000 different people, having different direct clients, and I started to see these patterns, I just thought that, you know what, I don't think a lot of people see what I see. I don't think a lot of people are seeing how sick people are getting. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to comment on, you know, mold makes you sick or anything like that. But I'm just talking about patterns. You have people in water damage homes. They're all complaining of illness, all different kinds of illness. And, you start to see these patterns as you go. And as I'm seeing these patterns and I'm hearing these stories, I mean, some of these stories literally bringing me to tears. I realize that, unless you're out there advertising yourself as somebody who cares to help these individuals that are suffering like that, I don't know that people are see that so much. Certainly, spoken with a lot of family members of maybe 1 out of 4 people seem to be more susceptible to their environment than the other 3 people, and the other 3 people don't understand what they're going through. And this all just kind of led to this idea of creating this podcast where I interview people who are suffering. Um, all of them have some sort of water damage or mold story. Yeah, obviously it could be bacteria too. Mold just tends to be the big buzzword that people
Mhm.
associate with. But when we're just zooming out a bit, we're talking about water damage homes. All of these people had run in with water damage homes, and all of them had just 50 different doctors. They had no idea what to do. It took them years to figure out. They finally changed their environment. All of a sudden, they start to get better. And some of them got better quickly. Some of them took 6 months, years, um, all kinds of different stories. And I wanted to put that out there because I wanted people to see that. I think it's really important. It's not to scare people. It's not to say like, you're if you see a water stain on your ceiling, you're definitely going to get sick. It's just more of creating this awareness around the fact that there are those that do need better air quality maybe than the average person, and we're not thinking of them and we're neglecting them. And I wanted people to see how they're a lot more frequent than what we're led to believe, because we always, when I would go to these meetings, even at the Indoor Air Quality Association, we talk with one another. They would be like, "Oh, that's the rare client or the problem client
Yeah,
or what
is it
have
though?
you." It's not as I'm telling you, it's not as
Yeah.
rare as we think it is. And so I wanted people to see that, and for people to have, for other people who may be suffering, have some connection with that person, that I'm not alone. There are people that experience this. I'm not crazy. I see, that this is a potential problem, and I just really kind of creating that community. And so it started off with then we started interviewing doctors, and we created Mold Talks docs, talking about their side of things and what they're seeing, and are they seeing people sick in water damaged buildings. And so it's been really interesting to kind of develop that podcast and just create a new perspective for people.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said too, because you know, and I see this in the industry too, which troubles me. People get very some professionals get very dismissive of clients that are having some of the most severe problems based on the fact that maybe they're, as a consultant, are not capable of finding the problem. so they automatically assume it's all in their head. You see, and you get
Sure.
that, and I think it's hard as it is. It's a difficult situation as a professional to always remain objective, but I think you have to, because you have to always recognize the fact that we don't have all the information on how people are really affected, and people are, physiologically are affected totally different. So
Totally.
just because you can walk in the environment as the professional and you can't find anything with your preliminary diagnostics, and you feel fine in the space, doesn't mean that the space is fine for that individual. You know,
Right.
Uh,
We're all different.
getting past that, though, it's hard to get people in the industry sometimes to get past that.
Totally, and I can understand. I think like we're just as human beings, we're always scared of things we don't know. You know, when I was 22 and I was diving into this, and it was like the first client I ever was dealing with. I was working for my dad's company at the time. I ran into this client. She was in Brooklyn, New York. She wasn't feeling well, was complaining. This was, my first project as, kind of working alongside my dad. It was like my first project that I was, technically responsible for. And yeah, of course I was scared, because this person said it was affecting her health, and I didn't fully understand it at the time. And when I finished the job, it was one of those jobs where it failed 3 or 4 times. I had this burning desire to be like, you know what? I'm not going to sit here and make excuses as to why it failed. I'm just going to go back and look around. What
Mhm.
did I miss? What did I do wrong? And I took it as a learning experience. And I'm still learning every day. Even 10 years later, it's still a learning
Oh,
experience
you're going
because
to be learning a long time.
you're
I
going to be
mean,
learning a long
when you
time.
stop learning, you're either dead, or you're just like really obtuse and you shouldn't be in the industry anymore.
But what's interesting, like I remember I was excited. I failed a couple times, I was excited when I finally got that
Excited about failing?
pass. No, I was
Oh,
excited. I was
sorry.
excited that I was excited to figure it out,
Okay.
for my first time, I think. And
Mhm.
so it was this burning desire to I didn't care, I knew that it was costing me time to having to keep going back that I wasn't going to make any money on, but it was beyond that. It was like I want to figure this out. And
Mhm.
then, you start to get some small wins. The next person I run into, maybe I failed twice, right? And then it started to get to a point where I was pretty regularly getting these jobs passed. I knew what to look for. I knew how to do
Mhm.
it. I kind of started to figure this out. And then, of course, you get another client that's like, I'm sensitive to light, sound, and I'm not leaving my house. Good luck, right? And how do I do that?
That's a
But
challenge.
it's a challenge. I like the challenge. And I think, when you like a challenge and you have this burning desire to just figure it out, that's what science is made out of, right?
Absolutely.
You figure it out, and you have to have that dedication. I think that that's kind of that burning desire is missing in a lot of people in
Mhm.
this industry. And I think we need to kind of get back to that state where we're like, you're not feeling well. I can't guarantee that this is it. I'm not a doctor, but you know what I can guarantee? I can guarantee that I can make your house more optimal, a better environment.
Mhm.
And I think if we stick with that, we're going to do good things.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd agree. One of the challenges too is often, right, there's more than a single constituent there's in play, when you get into a
Hmm.
space, right? There's this problem A, problem B, maybe a whole, plethora of different issues. And I think, and as you get longer in the industry, I think it's really hard to to keep conditioning yourself to not just jump that low-lying fruit. You find one parameter that is definitely a smoking gun, right? And you're like, close your investigations. Like, you shouldn't do that. You really need to, in my mind, keep looking for what other underlying things could be happening that you're not readily seeing. Because and it's hard to condition yourself to do that. And it's hard. There's also financial considerations, but I mean,
Sure.
I've seen so many projects where people have properly diagnosed one of the problems prior to we getting involved in the project, but they didn't find some of the other, the underlying stuff, and they never did resolve it for the client because they only fixed part of the problem.
Right.
So,
That happens a
yeah,
lot.
yeah, it's I don't know how we get past that. I mean, it comes back to education, and just understanding more, and I think we're still overall. I'll go as far as to say I think we're still woefully undereducated as an industry. I
Oh,
just
yeah.
I just feel that way. I think, and again, the foot soldiers, the people that are actually out in the trenches doing the work, very often don't have a clue as the overall hierarchy of how things go, right? There, I do this, I'm ripping sheetrock out, or I'm throwing stuff in bags, or I wipe walls down. But they don't understand, the A to Z of the project and
Right.
necessarily how their actions or inactions or wrong actions can adversely affect the outcome because they're very,
Totally.
narrow-minded.
You
How do you get
also have
around that?
you also have employees. You add employees into the mix, right? You do your best to train your employees. You get them all certified. Nobody's perfect. We're dealing with human beings. People make mistakes. So there's no perfect answer. And I think that going back to, if we have this burning dedication to help, I think that's really what's going to help push this thing forward. It's never going to be perfect. We're dealing with an imperfect science. We're dealing with imperfect tools and technologies.
Mhm.
But again, if you care enough to do everything you can to help somebody, I think that that's going to go a long way to helping them. And I think that's really the important part that we kind of need to get back
Mhm.
to, if you will,
Yeah.
as an industry.
Yeah,
Because it's
that's well
been
well
it's been
stated.
very smash and grab around here.
Mhm. Yeah, it's I mean, we're learning as we go, but sometimes I question whether we're learning, we're just going, like, and that's
Yeah.
a lot of the industry. Well, here's another question that's kind of related, a little unrelated, but why doesn't our industry, why do you think our industry doesn't do a better job of promoting the industry and everything and good science and, new ideas on social media? For the most part, our industry is woefully behind on that. I mean, through COVID, you saw like almost cricket, it was a cricket situation. The people that migrated to Twitter were mostly academia researchers, right? They were, there's
Yeah.
researchers everywhere. Joe Allen, Dr. Rich Corsi, very prominent people in the research side. But on the practitioner side, I didn't see anything. And I'm talking consultants as well. Why is that in your
It's
mind? I don't.
because just to be frank, I think our industry is kind of like Mean Girls. You
Ooh,
put yourself out there and you get attacked.
yeah, yeah.
So it's not a really it doesn't create a safe environment for people to want to put themselves out there and push things forward, because they know that it's very likely that 20 to 30% of the people are going to attack them and poke holes in anything they're trying to say. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. For me, I've been wanting to write my book for a long time, and I did have a lot of fear writing this book, because I know, like, there's people that read the book that are not going to agree with it.
Hmm.
But at some point, I just had to push that fear aside and say, you know what, I'm going to get this out there. It's going to help people. Not everyone's going to agree with it, and that's okay. Time agreement comes in time, right? As people see more data, as people experience more things, they're going to start to come to their own conclusions. I think at the end of the day, I'm probably not right about everything, because that would be insane if I was.
Right.
But I think that there's probably things that I am right about that are going to be utilized in the future more widely as other people come to that same conclusion. So I think at the end of the day, you know, just put yourself out there. It's fine. I did it. I'm sure there's people that attack me behind my back. It's okay. I think at the end of the day, we need more people to speak up and introduce new ideas, and evolve this industry forward. And I think, I hopefully more people are willing to do that.
I mean, I would say if you're not at least infuriating 10% of the audience, you haven't done your job. And honestly, and that's kind of like my mantra when I present. If everybody loves what I did something wrong because I didn't say anything that that sparked any controversy at all, and that
Yeah.
would be just unacceptable in my mind. So to that, good job. I definitely appreciate it. Yeah, we've run out of time. This went fast.
It did. It
So
went
I
really
I still
fast.
had
The great.
questions and I didn't
Uh,
even get to them, and it's like, wow, it's like pretty good. So we'll have to have you back again sometime because this was I'd
Would
like to
love to.
yeah, I'd like to continue the conversation, about the Change the Air Foundation, maybe a little bit more about that. And yeah, just some of the things you're doing. I do think that the industry to date has been woefully inadequate in how we've addressed the consumers.
Yeah.
We just haven't done a great job, any of us. It just we tend to. I don't know. I don't know why. But we need to do better. So that's great
Yeah.
that
I
you're
agree.
trying to do some of that. So next week, we got to talk about next week's show now. It's that time of the day. We'll be back here again next Thursday, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Our guest next week is Jay West, coming to us from Chicago. Some of you may know Jay as a co-host of our Healthy Indoors After Hours show that will be coming back again this season as well. But Jay's also been a long time involved in training in the building performance industry and the weatherization industry, and has moved into the indoor air quality sector of late. He's no stranger to saying controversial things, so Jay's always fun to have around. Um, our home ship, our mothership for Healthy Indoors is our site, healthyindoors.com. We have everything there. So all the back issues of Healthy Indoors magazine. By the way, we were only 30 days off from our 9th birthday with Healthy Indoors magazine, which seems crazy. I can't believe we've been doing this for 9 years. Our shows are there. We have a lot of stuff there. And obviously, we have the Healthy Indoors online global community, which is something that you should be involved with. We'll throw another commercial up at the end because I can't stop doing that. But it's global.healthyindoors.com. You can check it out. That's where you can see the back issues of this show, plus a lot of other shows we're involved with. We were starting to broadcast all over the place. So that's a lot of fun. Again, I would like to thank my guest, Michael Rubino. Again, he's the author of The Mold Medic. And well, good luck with your Home Cleanse rebrand and the Change the Air Foundation. Kind of exciting things.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So we're looking forward to watching what you do. 33 years old. It's like, God, you're only 30 years younger than me. That's crazy. It's just scary. Somebody's got to take the torch. It's good stuff. So anyway, until next week, we'll see you soon. I'm Bob Krell, and we'll see you next week on the Healthy Indoors live show.